The Sun Belt isn't just another region of the United States or the home of every US president from 1964 to 2000. No, this geographic region, which covers nearly everything south of the 36th parallel, bordering Mexico, where much of it was once located, is America's greatest bellwether, the nation's strongest economic engine, and home to 14 of its 15 fastest-growing cities. So without the success of these Sunbelt cities, entire decades of American growth and prosperity would mostly disappear, as relatively strong trends in national population, GDP, demographics, and employment are deeply dependent on this general area and especially these urban cores. When growth outside the Sun Belt has been modest, with much of the United States struggling to maintain its current population and economic scale, while the Sun Belt has attracted migration and immigration in the several millions, along with the relocation of respectable, well-established businesses and the rise of venture capital and startup endeavors. Seriously, just look at all these unicorn companies that have come out of the region in relatively recent times. So when you hear about a Rust Belt revival or growing pains in the Pacific Northwest, those headlines are deeply relative, especially when compared to this region, expected to account for 88% of future US growth. But it hasn't always been that way, and the Sun Belt is already facing countless difficulties, meaning that failure really could be an option. Of course, that doesn't even seem possible right now, as the Sun Belt region remains North America's primary hub for massive growth and capital funding, and honestly, it's been that way ever since the mass adoption of Willis Carrier's engineering marvel back in the early 1960s. As the rise of air conditioning allowed corporations to escape the heavy regulations, taxes, and labor costs that plagued the Northeast and Midwest back then. That and it's massive, covering everything from this coast to this one, while encompassing at least portions of 18 different US states. It's also home to about half of all US residents today, and that figure is only expected to grow into 2030, along with resource consumption, and the entire purpose of a region is to allow geographers to group people by common characteristics through geographic similarities, when the Sun Belt is so widespread that those generalizations tend to make little sense. For instance, while I keep talking about how the Sun Belt is booming like never before, parts of it, such as New Mexico, Southern California, Mississippi and Louisiana simply aren't, as residents and businesses are fleeing population centers in California, while New Mexico's population just dropped for 2 consecutive years, and the southern United States is growing, but at a rate that is only half of what we're seeing in the Mid-South and Southwest. And while southern states like Alabama and Mississippi remain incredibly affordable, the cost of living in the key Sunbelt cities of Phoenix, Las Vegas, Austin, and Miami is much more in line with Los Angeles and San Francisco, which are also located in the Sunbelt, by the way. Oh, and Miami is even less affordable than costly coastal cities in Southern California, with a recent report finding that Miami residents spend 81% of their net income on housing and property taxes. So this famously affordable region, with great weather, lower taxes, and more favorable regulations, has always been plenty of the opposite. But even if we ignore the paradox of a region so stretched out that it's hardly a region at all, with far too many expensive areas to be considered affordable, this story of the Sun Belt region would still be perplexing at best. It's like, one minute this is America's future, and the next it's doomed.
Officials in Las Vegas are racing to find new ways to conserve water.
California treating Arizona as a dumping ground for its hazardous waste.
Flooding emergency right here in California.
Periodic blackouts that have been going into effect since early this morning.
Olga Khazan from The Atlantic recently wrote that, "You'd think people would flee such a hellscape expeditiously, but as record-breaking heat fries the Sun Belt, the region's popularity only grows." Olga goes on to reference a different article from The Economist, where they break down how many of the nation's fastest-growing cities are located in the Sun Belt. But that's really the point here. The Sun Belt is growing mostly from a handful of important metros built on shaky foundations, and a nearly constant dependence on bull market conditions. Just look at how the Sun Belt's market fares during economic weakness, specifically its housing crisis in the late 2000s. And yet here in the 2020s, those difficult memories have all but disappeared, swept under the rug as Florida surpassed New York as the nation's third most populous state, and Sun Belt cities boast some of the nation's strongest property appreciation. While major businesses, from Tesla to ExxonMobil, from Apple to Publix, from Google, Intel, and Facebook to JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and CBRE, are all headquartered in just Texas, Florida, or California. And some of the most important US universities, like Stanford, the California Institute of Technology, Wake Forest, Duke, and Rice, are located in the Sun Belt. along with some of the nation's most important landmarks and attractions, the San Diego Zoo, both Disney's, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Alamo. So from the outside looking in, the Sun Belt looks massive, when in reality, it's sadly suffering under the weight of its own success, with the cost of housing and the cost of living there skyrocketing in every major Sunbelt metro, especially in principal Florida, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada cities, where much of the region's growth has come from, as positive trends in national wages have fallen far short of the growing expense of living there, while public institutions are oversaturated with demand and public schools deal with record-breaking classroom sizes, as city planners struggle to answer unthinkable demand, which has led to worsening sprawl in a region where sprawl was already out of control, with Sunbelt cities constantly breaking their own records for traffic and congestion, while light rail efforts, something I typically applaud, keep being built in areas with limited demand and inherent complexities. I know that's a lot, but it's to say nothing of the climate and environmental concerns spanning all over the region from the Sunshine State to sunny California. But if a worsening quality of life and countless warning signs haven't slowed the Sunbelt down, then nothing ever will, right? Wrong. Well, at the very least, there's real reason to doubt future growth trends in America's most myopic powerhouse region. Like I had mentioned before, portions of the Sunbelt are already struggling with slowing growth and even decline, as several major corporations and millions of residents have already left Southern California, leading to crowding in other Sunbelt states. But a substantial portion of those California expats have moved outside the region altogether, choosing places like Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and increasingly, the Midwest. While interregional migration has significantly changed several Sunbelt cities and states, contributing to already problematic population distribution in the region and pushing the cost of living in places like Las Vegas closer and closer to the cost of Southern California. While the concerning nature of being susceptible to recession, having declining affordability, and rising inequality is outright widespread, as are severe climate and environmental-related disasters. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has kept an index of climate and weather catastrophes, causing at least $1 billion in damages since 1980. With 81 different billion-dollar disasters happening during that time in Florida, 108 in Alabama, 119 in Georgia, and 170 in Texas, despite there being just a total of 373 such events since tracking started. In fact, according to the NOAA, 2023 is already the worst year on record for billion-dollar disasters, with more than half of those disasters happening in Sunbelt states. And that's just billion-dollar events, and it's based more on frequency when scale is the more important indicator, and the problem is as much about environment as it is weather anyway. See, the southwestern United States, which is critical to the economic success of the Sunbelt region, is facing severe water scarcity, as the Colorado River, the primary water source for all of these states, is quickly drying up. And that's not just a problem for folks looking to water their lawns in the desert. It's a major boondoggle for big businesses, like Arizona's new microchip foundries, which require significant water usage just to operate.